2 years ago, an academic study located and interviewed 5 pastors, all working within their parishes, who had, without their congregations knowing it, stopped believing in God. They were secretly atheist. A website started not long after, clergyproject.com, to give current and former members of the clergy a confidential forum to discuss their secret lack of belief. The website currently claims more than 185 members. We contacted the site's administrators to express our interest in speaking to one of those members. Speaking to one of our producers, one pastor said he no longer wanted to be secret about his skepticism. He wanted to come out. His name is Mike Aus. He is a working pastor at a non-denominational church in Houston, and he joins us now from Washington, where yesterday he attended the Reason rally. Mr. Aus, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be here.
Tell me a little bit about your just personal journey. How did you enter the clergy? Why did you enter the clergy? What was your religious faith upbringing?
I grew up as a Lutheran, mainline Protestant, had always gone to church my entire life, and just was a person of faith. And when I went to seminary, I got into it with the, like I said, the best of intentions, believing pretty much at the time I felt the whole doctrinal, all the doctrines and teachings of the church. And I just wanted to help people and enjoyed church life, and so that's how I got into it.
And when did you start to question that faith? What sort of precipitated the beginning of that journey?
Well, for me, it's been kind of a slowly jettisoning the some of the doctrines I found difficult to believe, and I would just tell myself, well, maybe you don't have to believe in the virgin birth, but you could still be a Christian. Or maybe you don't have to believe that Jesus fed the 5,000, but you could still be a Christian. And as I started to jettison the beliefs, I came to realize fairly recently that there wasn't a whole lot left.
What do you mean by that? What was that realization like?
Well, actually, it was brought on by reading some books from some of your other guests today, like Steven Pinker and Richard Dawkins. So they're part of the reason I'm here. It's been difficult to say, the farewell to parts of my life that have meant something to me, but it's also thrilling to see the world in a new way through Darwinian lenses, for example, through the lens of behavioral genetics and cognitive science that are explaining so much about human nature, things that religion could never explain.
At what point was there a gap? Was there a gap between what you were doing? I think we have some sound of you preaching here, and maybe we can play this, and you can sort of comment on it. In having to go to work every day and preach and talk about God and talk about faith, when you internally were having some very, very serious and severe doubts. Here's a little bit of your preaching.
For some reason, God just time and time again apparently does not seem to step in and magically fix the adversity, does he, in our life? He just doesn't magically wave his magic wand and fix everything in our life, because I think he's allowing us to grow through adversity. And that sounds like tough love, but I think it's true.
Do you think that's true? Did you think that's true when you were saying that?
I don't recall exactly, when I gave that message. I've tried always to preach with as much integrity as possible, never to be disingenuous from the pulpit, but try to insert some of course there I think I was wrestling with the ultimate theological question, the question of theodicy, for which there is no good answer. Theodicy being, if there is a good and loving God, why does he permit so much evil and suffering in the world? And frankly, for me, that's been really the big unresolvable question. We Christians tend to proclaim a God of love and grace and who cares about every human being deeply, but then he has a hard time getting around to feeding hundreds of millions of people on the brink of starvation every day. And that issue of theodicy is still a very big one for me.
Bob?
Yeah, can I ask Mike a question? I'm
Please.
curious if he feels any urgency about persuading believers, including maybe ones who are in his congregation, of the truth of atheism, or whether he feels that, look, perfectly good work can get done in a church, was getting done in a church, and leave people to their own devices.
Yeah, I guess I'm still thinking about that. There's part of me that does want to share what I've been learning, what I've been thinking about. I believe in church there are many people, both lay people and clergy, who are on a spectrum. I think all of us in church at some extent struggle in our faith, we're on a continuum. I don't think the line is necessarily that sharp between believer, non-believer, agnostic, atheist. I think all of us struggle. We're on a continuum. If you have the Pope on one end of the spectrum and Richard Dawkins on the other end of the spectrum, once upon a time I was closer to the Pope. Now I'm much closer to Richard Dawkins. And I would like to talk about that. Yes, churches do some great work. But I'm not sure that church life functions all that well. If church life functioned very well, then one would expect that the metrics of social well-being in this country would be much better in religious areas of this country versus less religious areas, and that's not the case.
Are you currently still at your church, or I mean, are you going to go preach next Sunday?
I'm going to go back next week and meet with my leadership and talk about where we're going to go from here, and we'll see.
I think I have a sense of what they're going to say. I mean, and I guess this brings the question that I think is a really important one, that I think for people that are not believers and are not embedded in the social fabric that goes along with religious faith and religious practice, the degree to which the social life of that is as important, perhaps, as the internal spiritual life of that. I mean,
absolutely.
That must be. I know in my own life and in the Catholic world in which I grew up, that was as much, I think, of what being Catholic was the parish and parish life and the community of fellowship that entailed, as whatever I thought about transubstantiation, which I frankly didn't think a whole lot about.
No, I think you're absolutely right on the mark, Chris. That's been my experience in nearly 20 years of ministry, is that people gravitate to the community life, the warmth that they can experience. I mean, Homo sapiens is a tribal creature. We need a tribe, and people do experience emotional support and community and caring for each other within churches very often, and the doctrinal issues are often not primary. One of the dirty little secrets of Christianity is hardly anyone ever reads the Bible. And I think if they did, the whole thing would be in big trouble.
The Catholic Church thought that too at once upon a time. Pastor Mike Aus, stick around. We're going to talk a little bit more about this when we come back.
Okay.
That's an apposite bump in with Jeff Mangum, who has a very complicated relationship to religion in his music. We have Pastor Mike Aus, who is sort of coming out on our show today, actually, right now in national television, that he is no longer believes in the Christian faith that he has been preaching for 20 years. And Stephen Pinker, I wanted to ask you, hearing him talk about reading one of your books in the context of that kind of trajectory, I wonder what your reaction is to that.
Yeah, I mean, I've never written a book defending atheism But what I do try to do is explain some of the phenomena that traditionally have been attributed to religion: the presence of moral conscience, the ability to be conscious, the fact that we're intelligent, that we're reasoning creatures, embedded in an overall naturalistic view of the history of life in the universe. And I think when you see that there is a satisfying, indeed a thrilling story of how we got to be who we are, then it makes some of the narratives from the religious tradition just that much less compelling. We do have an answer to the question of where we came from, why we think, why we can make moral choices. You don't need Jesus, you don't need scripture, you don't need religious doctrine to understand our place in the world. And I'm guessing that that's why the writings of a psychologist should be seen as having anything to do with the validity of religious belief.
Is that more or less right, Mike?
Absolutely. That's a great summary. It was reading, especially in Stephen Pinker's book, The Blank Slate, where he, just as he said, the power of scientific thought to explain, answers that we used to look to religion for. I came to understand that, for example, altruism has its roots in our ancestral past, and that religion isn't the source of our altruistic impulses, but rather it became the repository, the place where we expressed these impulses towards goodness and love that developed thousands of years before.
Bob. Yeah, can I ask Mike another question? I mean, I'm sure he's familiar with the ways in which you can evoke religion and religious impulses to bring out the best in people, to encourage altruism more than they might otherwise exhibit. I'm wondering if he's thought a little about if he wants to keep inspiring people to do things like that, how he might do it on a naturalistic basis.
Yeah.
Have you given that some thought? Or, I mean, do you talk...
Oh, you're asking, I'm sorry, you're asking me?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Would you invoke evolutionary psychology?
Pardon?
Is this something you think about, how you could sort of convert the sort of the work that you've been doing in sort of moving people to a sort of elevated moral plane in a secular context?
Yes, absolutely. I would like to just pursue my readings and help people learn more about what I've learned through these evolutionary psychology, behavioral genetics, cognitive science, and even finding ways that I think there are probably ways you can make connections with parts of Scripture. I mean, it's Scripture is not. I'm not saying Scripture is devoid of wisdom. You just have to hunt pretty hard to find it sometimes, but I think there are connections.
Pastor Mike, let me ask you one more question. We had Richard Dawkins on before, and I want to address this because he's got a very kind of hard-edged approach to speaking about religious people and their beliefs, and says words like nuts and crazy, and those are words that I really dislike just as generally, because I think they kind of tend to stand in the way of the sort of empathy needed to actually have productive conversation and public dialogue. And I wonder what your sense is of how someone like Richard Dawkins, how that language resonates among the people, that the flock of faithful that you have been stewarding and being among for the last 20 years.
Well, I think very, very highly of Richard Dawkins. His books have been significant in my journey as well. So I don't want to address necessarily his choice of rhetoric. That's he can choose to do that, and I think maybe different rhetorical styles for different people. Perhaps is not the language that I would choose to use, because I would like to try to build bridges and look for more understanding between the non-believing and the believing communities.
Susan.
I think if there is one thing the secular community is missing right now, it's what a great man, who's one of the many things lost from our history, Robert Green Ingersoll, who was known as the great agnostic in the 19th century. There has to be what he showed people was that passion and reason are not opposed to each other. For instance, one of his favorite lectures, it started with the great soliloquy of Lear on the Heath, "Poor naked wretches, wheresoever you are," and ending with, "Give the superflux to them and show the heavens more just." This is a kind of secular rhetoric which was common then, which isn't common now.
Absolutely.
It is sorely lacking. Just as Darwin put it on the page, there is a grandeur in this view of life. Right. It is not true that you cannot make secular speeches like this, but nobody today is doing it. We lack that person.
That's interesting. We lack a sort of a vocabulary of secular inspiration.
Exactly. Exactly.
Pastor Mike Aus, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Really, really appreciate you being here and being so open and honest. And good luck with that meeting next week.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Good to be here.
All right, what you should know for the news week ahead, coming up next.